Bells have always played an important part in human history, calling the faithful to prayer or just making a cheery sound at Christmas. My story tonight proves that bells can have more use than just the obvious ones. Welcome to the latest of my 10-minute tales. Today's story is slightly unusual in that I can find absolutely no evidence for it ever happening at all. I can only leave it to you to decide on the truth or otherwise. This tale is called The Bellman of Belgrade, and it goes like this. Many years ago, the otherwise fair city of Belgrade was plagued by a vast army of rats, and rather obviously the town council were anxious to do something about it. The residents were becoming increasingly alarmed and civil unrest was promised. So when a strange old gent came into town with a miraculous invention, the council embraced him to their municipal bosoms, as it were, without looking too closely at what the invention might be. So far you think so very Pied Piper of Hamelin. Well, yes, so far. The invention, as it turns out, was not so much a machine as a method. And the method, much as it seems blindingly obvious to us now in the 21st century, was a bit of a radical departure in the days when the boats on the Danube were made of wood and oxen ploughed the fields. The method was a systematic removal of rubbish and filth from the town by regular collection. At that time, the good citizens of that fair city were unaware of the relationship between rats and rubbish. But as soon as he began his work, it did show some results. After a few weeks, merely by dint of walking round with a large basket, he had managed to clear the main thoroughfares, and rats were no longer spotted dodging the wheels of the carts and running under the skirts of ladies crossing the road. But our man, let's call him Bellman, shall we? His other name is sadly forever lost to us. Bellman returned to the council and asked for funds to purchase a horse and cart to enable him to extend his collections into the side streets and alleys. Well, the council were already paying him well for his services, but they reluctantly agreed to paying him for the upgraded service, even if the upgrade only consisted of a rickety old cart and a broken down old nag. But the rat nuisance continued to abate under his method, and when the side streets and alleys were cleared, it was necessary to move into the little back squares and courts, hemmed in by the tall tenements. The people here were less excited by Bellman's method, not because they were any the less concerned with hygiene, but because they felt it was a bit of an intrusion on what little privacy they possessed. However, Bellman persevered, although he was now having to dodge showers of rubbish falling from the windows of the high buildings, whether aimed or accidental. So he now returned to the council for some wood to build an enclosure round his cart, and after much debate and sniffing at the rising costs, they did agree. The strange new mobile device was now a feature of the streets of Belgrade, progressing through the crowds like a lumbering armadillo, even if no one in the city at that time would have known what an armadillo was. The rats, however, were beginning to see the end of their relatively easy lives, so they too were fighting back, nibbling and chewing at the sides of the vehicle and nipping at Biela's ankles and the fetlocks of the nag. But Honor Biela went deeper and deeper into the dark recesses of the city, and at times actually fighting colonies of rats and being badly bitten. But when he returned once more to the council, they were set against any further expenditure. He argued that with one last push, the people of Belgrade would be free of the rodent population forever. And although Biela pleaded with all the force of logic and reason, of an emotion and sentiment, the councillors were unmoved. After all, they said, what he was asking for was nothing less than a suit of armour for himself and for his horse that would be more than the actual kings of England, France and Spain together could afford. But, as I have intimated already, Biela was a man of ingenuity and resource, and whilst out on his rounds one day, he passed the ruins of the old cathedral that was being demolished to make way for a bigger and grander edifice. And there on the ground, amid the pile of ancient masonry and beetle-infested roof trusses, were the bells from the now demolished tower. And the biggest of these was a great bell of bronze weighing at least 4 tons. When he approached the canons and deans of the cathedral, they shrugged collectively and said they had no use for any of the old rubbish, as they were having a fine new set cast, specially for the new building. Well, it was only a matter of attaching the wheels from the cart and hanging some baskets inside, and Biela had his armoured rubbish collecting device. He had left the clapper of the bell hanging inside, as he felt it gave warning to approaching traffic, and because, frankly, he had no idea where he was going. But it was the ringing of the bell as it approached that seemed to drive the rats into a final frenzy, and they appeared in their dozens, flinging themselves against the great bronze monster that moved among them relentlessly. The Bellman of Belgrade, as he now came to be called, was the centre of attention in the town as he boomed and jangled along. But any goodwill he had garnered was not to last for long. After he had ruined the skirts of several ladies who were too proud to run out of the way, he was beginning to be considered as much a nuisance as the rats had been. The good citizens of Belgrade began to be annoyed by the incessant clanging and jangling that seemed to fill the streets from dawn to dusk, and sometimes well into the night. Oh, this is where things began to go wrong. In order to obtain even a tiny view of the way ahead, the bell was raised off the ground by a few inches, and Beulah hung himself upside down from the clapper in order to peer through the tiny opening at ground level. Then, one midnight, the people of the city suddenly noticed how quiet it had become. The bell was no longer ringing. At last, they thought, we shall have a peaceful night. Well, the next morning, there was the bell in the middle of the great square, in the centre of the city, still and unmoving and quite silent. People approached with some trepidation. What had befallen the bellman? Well, I think you can guess. When the crowd managed to raise the bell on its side, a vast, seething, biting wave of rats swept out and scattered through the crowd. Ladies screamed, gentlemen drew their pistols and swords. But when they finally managed to see what had happened to the bellman, they gasped in disbelief. All that remained of the bellman was a few bones picked white and hanging upside down from the clapper. The skeleton was consigned to a drawer in the municipal offices because he was not a native of the city and didn't warrant a burial plot, and his work was quickly forgotten. Although the rats never returned in the numbers that had been present before. Altogether, a rather sad end for someone who had done so much good for the city. But I'm sure if you ever visit the city, someone in the city hall will remember which drawer he is in and open it to show you the shining white skeleton of Beulah, the bellman of Belgrade. Well, if you like these stories, please share and subscribe to my YouTube channel, and you will hear more as I make them. Goodbye.